This is a fly I developed quite a number of years ago. I named it the Junebug Sculpin. One, because it has Junebug flashaboo on it, but two, because that's the name of our German short hair. This fly is very effective in the winter. I really like the blue and purple are probably my best two favorite color tones for winter fishing for steelhead, especially with the low light that we see all the time up here in northern Michigan. The sun doesn't really ever come out much. It works really well with the low light, and usually the water will have some color to it. But even when the light gets super low in the winter months, like early morning and evening, it actually almost seems like the water does have more of a color to it because it's just so cloudy. So blue and purple hues, I would say, are really good color tones for fishing in Michigan in the winter months. This fly, what we're going to use today is it's a shank fly. Usually I prefer like a 35 millimeter to 40 millimeter shank. This is the shank that we will be using, which is a 40. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see how, we tie it on. And then what we're going to do for the focus of the fly is going to be olive rabbit for the tail. And then for the body, we're going to use one of my favorite things I use in a lot of streamers, not only for swinging but for trout too, is this UV polar chenille. This one's olive copper. And then for the head, we're going to take an old page out of back when we really started swinging flies in the early days. A good friend of mine, Kevin Feenstra, did a sculpin called the emulator, and he used a possum head, Australian possum. So we're going to use this as the head of the fly, followed by just a little hot spot of some peacock eye ice dub UV with a collar in front of that of some wood duck flank. Nice and webby, stiff fibers. It'll give this fly a lot of movement over top of the wing of the flashaboo. And for this fly too, I'm going to put a jointed bee chain eye. So instead of just 2, I'm going to put 4 on there. Something I saw, once again, my good friend Kevin Feenstra adapted to some of his flies, and I think in some situations it's going to be perfect because having the sculpin part of this fly, having the possum for the head, is going to you don't want that fly to, you want to fish it in situations where it's not a very deep run, because that sculpin's actually going to levitate the fly a little bit. It's a little bit more buoyant, so it's going to keep that fly riding a little higher. But just adding the bee chain eyes will drop it as soon as it does hit the water along the bank in the deeper part of the run. So we'll just get that fly to sink a little bit faster. And then I like using possum in the winter when the water's low too, by adapting the bee chain eye or by putting the bullet head weight on, like I've showed you before, by weighting it. Like if I'm fishing something very shallow and I know I'm fishing over snags basically, I want to have that possum fly on because I know it's going to be, buoyant enough where it's not going to snag on the bottom and get caught on the logs and whatnot. But if I'm fishing a situation where I want it to get down deeper, I will add the bullet weight or I will tie some up with the bee chain eyes. And this also gives a little bit of rattle to the fly. If you shake these bee chains by cutting it as the 4 like this and tying it center on, it's going to have a little bit of rattle, and who knows, that might get their attention too. Make sure when you cut this though, we don't want to use your good scissors. You want to use some type of cutter, wire cutter or whatnot to cut it. And then for the hook off the back of this, I like to use a number 2, like a owner's Gamakatsu style hook, stinger hook. And then I prefer nowadays just using braid. This is a heavy, I believe it's 55 pound braid for attaching my stinger hook to the back. Some guys use wire, which is okay too. I just found after a while the fly would get ruined because the wire just gets so crimped if you're catching multiple fish on them, which isn't a bad problem to have, but you end up losing the fly eventually because the wire's just too crimped up from it getting hinged, while fighting the fish. So we're going to start by putting our shank in. Like I said, this one's a 40, so it's a little bit bigger, which it'll still work well, but I wanted to do it a little bigger so it'll be easier for you guys to see while I'm tying it. So same thing, a heavy thread. This is a 140 altar thread. Like I said in prior fly tying stuff, I use this a lot. It's just a nice heavy taut thread. And I'm just going to make multiple thread wraps. Get it cinched down around the shank, like so. This will keep that material on. Now for putting my backing on, what I like to do is tie just a couple overhand knots in it. And basically when I tie this on, I like to have it usually about the shank, the length of the shank itself. So like right here, and I'm going to draw it back. I don't want it too far back because then it might, have a tendency to get wrapped around the shank while casting it. So I want to just, basically I'm going to tie this off so it's about the length of the shank. And what I do is I'm going to bring it through the eye, like so. Just bring it up through and kind of do my measurement. And then with these overhand knots, that's going to help keep it in place too. You really want to cinch this down. Like if I'm tying a bunch of these, I even will put some super glue on them. So I'm just going to do a lot of thread wraps right towards the eye. And then I'm even going to take this and I'm going to pull it back and wrap it all around there. Just like so. So I know when a fish goes to grab that hook, I'm going to have confidence knowing that he's not going to rip that thing right off. And sometimes with the wire or beetle on, that can happen if you don't cinch it down quite enough. And I think that's why I kind of like using braid, because you just don't get that. So you can see I'm putting lots of pressure on that and I'm not even budging it. And then if you're a pretty beginner tyer, I'm going to show you probably the best way to put your bead chain on is to do it right now. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie that on, because that way it'll give me an idea of my spacing and how much material I'm clumping on. If I work my way to the front and then all of a sudden go, oh, I got to put my bead chain on, and I've run out of room. So this will kind of give you an idea of where it needs to be just by start off and tie it on now. And you can tie this on the top or the bottom. I just prefer easy to tie it on the bottom, or on the top of the shank, sorry. And then I'm going to work my thread back. So that's kind of how we have it so far. So if you saw, like with the bead chain, all I did was, I started in the center, and then I just kind of pivoted it, and I'm just making like figure eights around the shank to hold it on. And if you want it to go to the bottom, voila. So we can run it like that. We'll just run it tight on the bottom. So that'll make this fly riding hook up. So that's basically how you have it. And then if you were going to put your stinger hook onto it, you're just going to take this loop that I made, and you're going to come through the eye of the hook, and then we're going to go over and pull tight, like so. So that'll kind of give you an idea. And I'm going to take it off so I don't get a hook poked in me while tying the fly. So then we're going to start with the tail. This is just an olive rabbit strip. It's not cross-cut, it's just a strip. And we're going to, same thing, we're just going to tie this. We're going to measure it out to the length of the shank of our shank, and we're going to pull it back. We're going to tie this in. You want to get it pretty tight because rabbit does have a tendency it'll want to spin on you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this back. And then for my body, I'm going to add in the UV polar chenille. And this is olive. So with this, I like to kind of pull it back with my fingers so it's all sticking up, because I'm going to tie this on, just kind of palmer it, almost just like if I was tying on hackle or schlopplin, or even this rabbit strip if I wanted to palmer it. And I'm just going to tie it off at the tip, kind of bring it back, and then I'm just going to kind of palmer it forward. And I just kind of bring the fibers out with my fingers. Just kind of work them out. And now I know where my eyes are going because we already tied them in, so I know not to overcrowd everything. So I'm going to stop about there. Front of the eyes. And just kind of pull that out. So in the current, this chenille is pretty cool because it gives it some flash and it'll give it some movement too. So just like that. Now what I'm going to do is kind of pull on both sides, try to get it so it's even. And then I'm going to take this rabbit and I'm going to pull it right up towards the front. So now I have like a long tail, just like a, kind of if you ever look at a sculpin. It's big head and then all tail. And I'm just going to tie this off. And just like that. And then for my wing, I'm going to add the Junebug Flashaboo, which you can see. It's got very good winter tones in it. Blue, green, and a little bit of copper, and copper works very well in a lot of our western Michigan rivers that have steelhead and salmon in them. We get a really good, especially if we have that tea stain to the water, copper tends to be a really good color for steelhead and trout in Michigan rivers, especially on this side of the state. So we're going to get, we'll go probably about a pencil's width of our Flashaboo. And we're just going to lay this on top. And cinch it in. So again, this is a pretty simple fly, but it works really well. Like I said, I tie a lot of my flies that are simple, but they're effective. They might not be the prettiest, And by no means am I a pretty commercial fly tyer, but... And then what I'm going to do is take this, and if I want more flash, like right now it would be fine, but I'm going to put it all on there. Just because, like I said, I'm going to fish this in the winter, so the lower light situations, early morning, evening, hopefully the water will have some color to it. So I'm going to pull it all back and then cinch it again. So I'm just basically doubling up the Flashabou, just like so. You can always take this off, but you can't put it on. It's always good to have more. Like I'll even carry a scissors in my bag, and I'll snip some off if I want. Like if the water's clear or the sun's out a little bit, I'll just take that scissors out of my gear bag and just snip a little bit of flash off. Then for the collar, we're going to add the wood duck flank to the front. So basically what we're going to do with this is I've been tying everything wrapping forward. So I'm going to take this wood duck flank and I'm going to take the smaller edge of it here, the shorter fibers, and I'm just pulling it off like so. And then I'm going to tie it tip in first. And get it cinched down good so when you go to pull on it, it's not going to... And then I'm just going to wrap it forward, just bringing it back around. So get all those fibers kind of up over the Flashabou. Just like that. And then I'm just going to work my thread in here and give it a nice, tie it off, pulling up on the base of the stem of that feather. And then I'll just take it and kind of work it again a little bit with my fingers. And then I'm going to snip it off. Just like that. And then I'll kind of move it because it is pretty webby, so it's kind of stuck, and I like to separate it a little bit because that'll give this fly even more movement in the current. And then I'm just going to take my fingers. You can even wet your fingers, sometimes it'll be easier to pull it back. And I'm just going to pull it all back and tie it off. So you can see it's long and it's going to have a lot of movement, a lot of flutter to it in the currents. And that's it too. In the winter months, you kind of want to really focus on a lot more movement in your fly. A lot of the fish are going to be holding in much slower winter type pools, and they don't work too hard in the winter months to get their food. They're going to be, just like us, pretty lazy the colder it gets and the colder those water temps get. So having, focusing on a lot of movement in your fly is a big key in fishing winter type pools. A lot of the winter pools are so slow, they're, pretty much kind of a walking step speed to them. And that's where you're going to find your fish in the winter months, and they're going to be around the wood and the log jams. And like I said, that's why adding the possum head to it is going to help too, because it's going to keep this fly more buoyant in the water column. It's not going to drop it right down to the woody debris where it's going to get hung up. So that's what next is we're going to add some possum. And I might even do more than one clump. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it around the shank and kind of pinch it with my fingers so it'll get it all the way around, almost like if you were, like I said before, tying an egghead, spinning deer hair. So I'm going to get that all the way around, like so. You can see I flipped it It's all the way around that shank. And then I'm just going to take the head of this, and I'll probably trim it just a little bit, but it's kind of just like we did with the egg head. I'm just going to pull it back with my fingers and then tie behind it. So it kind of gives it that flat-headed Sculpin look. And it's going to add a little bit of buoyancy to this fly, but just by having that little bead shade on there, it's going to sink in enough that when it hits the bank on the edge of the pool, it hopefully will come down into that current seam where that fish is going to be sitting, and it'll be fluttering right in front of his face or her face, hoping to coax them into eating it. So you can see how I did that. I just like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go in front of the bead chain. We're going to get a big clump of the peacock eye, and we're just going to put this in front. It's kind of like a little hot spot, just like we'd add, you know, if we wanted to make an egg-sucking leech. But we're going to get a good clump of this, and it's kind of like a pearl, almost has kind of a lavender hue too, almost like a little purple blue to it. And I'm going to do the same thing, get a big clump, like so, and I'm going to lay it on top. And I'm going to wrap it and pinch it, just like that. And that's just going to give it a little more of an attractor to the fish. It's going to grab the light a little bit. On a dark winter's day, maybe some reflection off the snowbanks. I'm just going to trim it. And then I'm going to take it, just like we did with making egg heads, and I'm just going to pull it back and then tie it off in front. And just make a good head, good base. So it's kind of a funky looking fly, but like I said, over the years it's been very effective for me in the winter months when the light's low and the water temps have dropped. The fish slow down their metabolism just like we do in the winter. They get lazier, so we got to come up with something that really grabs their eye, either with the flash or with movement. And that's the Junebug Sculpin.